So, I mean, you have to change your habits. I mean, when people say, how long does it take to charge? I say, oh, about 15 seconds. And they're like, what? I'm like, yeah, I get home, I plug it in. When I leave in the morning, I unplug it. It's fully charged. I leave it with a full tank every day. Going to the gas station is extremely inconvenient. And I don't try and talk people into it or out of it. It's kind of, that question is a good question, but it's like, should I buy a Ford or a Chevy? Well, what are you doing with it? I mean, the conversation to actually give anybody a good answer about many of these topics would require this whole podcast on that one subject, right? Yes. Are you prepared to change? What is your motive? Is it for the earth, or is it for the dollar, or is it just because they look cool? I mean, there's people buy them for different reasons.
Hello and welcome to EVfriendly. I'm Ken Hendricks.
I'm Renee Young.
And this is the podcast for you if you want to hear exciting conversations about electric vehicles. On today's episode, we'll be talking with Scott Waddle. Scott is the owner of Precision Auto in Langley and a pioneer in the growing field of EV battery repair and maintenance. He's also a Red Seal mechanic and was one of the first to complete the BCIT EV technician training program. Scott, welcome to the podcast.
Hi. Yes, thanks for having me here.
Bet. Why don't you begin just telling us, how did you get interested in electric vehicles?
Okay, sure. Well, I'll admit that, I'm interested in all types of cars, but I have to admit that a lot of it came from my son, who is working as an apprentice automotive technician right now, and his interest in electric vehicles really spurned my interest. So I kind of got driven that way from a pretty young age. He was interested in the technology, and so I kind of followed what his interests were and started learning more about them, and he drove it from there to where it is today.
Right on. So where is it actually? Like what percentage of service do you do that is electric?
Right. I don't have a percentage number, but what I am seeing is that we generally have 2 or 3 in the shop every day. Now that's not 2 or 3. Sometimes the vehicles will come in for, and then they'll be at the shop for a week. But we always have 1 or 2 on site all the time now is where it's gotten. And that's grown a lot. I mean, a year ago it was only once a month. And the growth rate as they age, getting off through the warranty period and getting to the age where they actually start to break, we were starting to see more and more of them, but it would be a small percentage still.
Yeah. So you're certainly starting to get the reputation as a pioneer in the EV repair, for sure. Is that something, do you have to remarket yourself, you think, to your customers, or?
We did, and it's not to our customers, because our existing customers, I don't think any of them have brought an EV in for anything other than the most basic type maintenance that you expect on a newer one. The market has found us, and that is through, it was targeted for sure through sponsorship of, like the Vancouver Electric Vehicle Association. They used to do a yearly event called Electrifest. We sponsored that. We attended several times, getting involved in the social media EV community, being members, and offering input and advice to people when they were asking about them. And that's how we did it. So it's all been grassroots or social media based at this point. We do not advertise for electric vehicles, though we do advertise some for hybrid vehicles, because there's a lot more of them on the road, and they're a lot more, they require more maintenance, and so they're a regular, they always have been a regular fixture in our shop. We target those. The EVs, they've come from a different direction. They found us because there's a lot of cases where nobody else wants to fix them, including the local dealers are often reluctant to fix some of these vehicles. The older ones, the ones that are breaking, are often, they're compliance vehicles sold in California, then imported into BC. And so none of the local dealers, whether it be a Toyota or a Fiat or whatever, have any training on them because they only sold them in California.
Yeah.
And so that gives us an advantage where the local dealer doesn't want to fix them. They have to find somebody.
Right. So do you think, is it just going to be a matter Because I could probably say that there's very few of you that actually could say that they specialize in any way in electric vehicles. Do you think it's just a matter of training, or are independent shops going to have to really make a wholesale change then and how they market themselves?
I think a lot of it, I mean, in the early days, you have to change, you have to want them. But as time comes along, when they start replacing the mainstream vehicles on the road and they start to need service, it will just happen like anything else. So whether it be 35 years ago when electronic ignition or when fuel injection came along, there was shops out there who said, you know what, I'm never going to fix those things. That's the end of it. And most of them actually adapted, and a few of them went away, right? Mm-hmm. I think we're going to see more go away this time because this is a wholesale change. But they will slowly just start showing up, and they'll learn as they go, as they always have with, I mean, automotive technology changes fast. And I'd say in the consumer's world of anything that they own, nothing has as much technology as a car. And that's been that way for 25 years probably. So we've always adapted in the automotive service world and will continue. So most of them will, but some will disappear.
If I can tag on the question about marketing, I do know that you have at least a few of your service loaner vehicles are EVs. So I'm wondering if that has perhaps had any influence on your customers who may not own an EV, or do you only loan those to people with EVs?
Right. So I think, we have an EV we use as a shuttle vehicle. I own another EV personally. We own several hybrids, but we actually don't lend out an EV. We just use it for shuttling customers home and running errands and things like that. I definitely bought it as a marketing piece, and I didn't do it to get more EV repairs. I actually did it to just showcase technology, to point out to the consumers that we're not scared of technology. And there's a lot of people who think they got a new vehicle and it has to go to the dealer because only they can, work on these sophisticated cars and stuff. And so I wanted to go like, okay, well, how more high tech can I get? I'm going to buy an EV and say, this is nothing different for us. We know how to service and fix and repair these. So if we can fix this EV, we can obviously fix whatever's wrong with your traditional ICE car, right? So that's really why I bought it, not to get more EVs in. They have followed, but I don't think people see that car and go, they're the guys for my EV. The people that find us for EV is definitely through the EV community, mostly on social media, but through the Vancouver Electric Vehicle Association for sure has steered a lot of business our way, but even the Victoria one and then the social media pages.
Right.
On the technology aspect and consumer, this is one of the things that is a popular misconception, I believe, out there, that EVs require no maintenance. Mm-hmm. We might agree that they require less maintenance because there are less moving parts and things like that. But how do you see this translating into what we've always had as the DIY situation there? Do you think that consumers are going to be less inclined to attempt repairing their cars when they're all EVs? And how is that going to affect shops? If there is less maintenance to do, is that going to have a detrimental effect on your overall volume of business?
Mm-hmm. So there's a couple parts to that question. There's two answers. The early adopters were enthusiasts, and so many of them were more likely to actually want to service their vehicle, what they could do. And the reality is what they can do on an EV is a lot of simple do-it-yourself type stuff. They can rotate the tires, they can change the wiper blades, they can change the cabin air filter. That's easy stuff. Enthusiasts feel good about doing that stuff. They like to do it. The next generation that's buying them is much like everybody else, and so they need a service provider for them. There is a lot less maintenance, but they are often ignored too because they think they have almost zero maintenance. They never get inspected. I mean, we see some failures on these cars that were easily preventable if they were in a service shop to actually get inspected by a technician as part of its annual or twice a year maintenance that the average car would be getting. They're completely ignored until they actually fail. And that can be detrimental. I mean, we all know that it costs more to ignore than it does to maintain, right? Mm-hmm. And EVs are no different, but there's definitely a lot less work on them. And it will definitely change our industry. We're going to definitely see less work from them.
But when they do come in, the cost of the repairs, does that offset any of that loss?
Maybe, but the cost is mostly in the parts.
Okay.
And so what we do see is they're very reliable for probably about 10 years. So most of the ones we're fixing are, over 10 years old. And then when they do fail, yes, it can often be a fairly high-tech component that's not locally stocked, that is very expensive. And so that's a challenge. And almost for sure they do require, you should have some specialized training to work on them in terms of the EV and safety and such, but they almost always require factory level diagnostic equipment. They even require programming when you replace the parts. So you can't just bolt them in and have the car work again.
So I want to touch on, obviously, battery lifespan. And batteries are probably the number one concern now in consumers. So if you were someone and you're looking at buying, say, an 8-year-old EV and the battery has a 10-year warranty on it. So obviously your concern is what's going to happen after that 10 years. Can you kind of comment on that? What would you say to a potential buyer to give them some reassurance?
It's pretty tough. There's two different things going on in the battery world. One I will say is like the Nissan Leaf, which is, was the number one selling EV in the world until about 2 years ago when the Tesla Model 3 passed it, and the Model 3 passed it. Like in 1 year, they sold almost as many as they did in 10 years of the Leaf, it seems like. So the Model 3 just took off. But the Leaf is 2011 onward. That battery was known to deplete. Nissan could have put thermal management cooling system into the battery. They chose not to, kept the price down, made them very simple. And so the batteries in the early Leafs depleted. And so your range would just get lower and lower and lower. And they get to a point where you can do like 50 kilometers on a charge. And that's when the car is almost useless, right? So that was the one car that is different than almost all the rest. And then in the later years, the Leaf battery, they made some changes to the chemistry, then they made some changes to the design, and they've proven to be better, but there's still no cooling system. So that's the one example. The other is like, say, the Teslas. The Tesla batteries have been known to be very, very good, and they last a long time, and I wouldn't be very concerned about the lifespan of a Tesla battery. In between, there's a couple outliers, but things are changing, fairly fast, and now that there's so many manufacturers producing, they've learned a lot along the way, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And everybody else is cooling the batteries to make them last longer. But we've got these challenges that we're seeing now with several of them having fire issues. And so we don't know where that's going to go. These cars are still too new. They're still under warranty. So if, how many years they've been making a Bolt for? They've been making them for a few years now. But until there's enough of them that are 10 years old, I don't know what the lifespan of those ones are going to be, right? But I wouldn't be overly concerned about the battery life on most EVs. I think that they're going to be really good. But when they do fail or when they just get depleted, they are pretty expensive. And there's still some car manufacturers out there, even mainstream ones. Tesla has its own unique way of selling parts. But Nissan's made it extremely difficult to buy a battery for one of those early Leafs. So you can't go to the Nissan dealer and buy a brand new battery. They make it almost impossible to do so. And they have batteries out of their newer ones, which are mostly reverse compatible, and they're absolutely adamant that they're not going to sell you that battery. They want the serial number of your car. They're not going to. If to buy a battery, if I said I want one out of a 2019 because it's a better battery with more power, 40 kilowatts instead of 24 kilowatts, that's a flat out no. So Nissan could have made it a lot easier to keep these cars on the road if they were easier to sell the parts for them. And there's others that have put up a fight as well. Volkswagen was one, and we had one from a collision, an insurance company. Battery was damaged from below. They wanted it repaired, and Volkswagen really fought us. They sold us a bunch of parts for it, and then we were waiting and waiting for the rest of the pieces. They're like, oh, well, when we finally dug in, they're like, you're not eGolf certified. We can't sell them to you. And I'm like, well, who is eGolf certified? And there's like, well, there's almost nobody. And like, okay, well, all right. So I took my BCIT EV certificate from the training course that I took, and I said, who can I contact that's higher up than you? And they gave me some email address, and so I emailed my EV certificate to them and said, well, I guess I'm your certified guy. BCIT says I am. Is there a higher credential in the province? It took about 2 hours. They called me back. Yeah, the parts have been released. So, but they were going to fight it, right? And so buying parts for them is a concern for me going forward. I think we'll work through most of these things. You know, there's this big thing, oh, it's electric, it's dangerous, and all that stuff. And legal departments got them, you know, thinking about things. And it's like, well, you know, there is some safety concerns working on electric vehicles, of course, but almost all the danger is actually limited to the technician working on the car. You cannot put a battery in a car incorrectly in a way that would harm the consumer, the owner of the car. It'd be almost impossible. I mean, like so infinite, like very hard. You're way more likely to have somebody blow your wheel on wrong than you are to have any kind of injury from an electric vehicle because somebody fixed it wrong.
Yeah.
The person fixing the car wrong absolutely is at risk. But if it goes together and it works, it's really safe.
So you brought up some interesting things about the access to parts and information. We'll pick up on that in just a minute because I think we really need to touch on that. But you also mentioned some other things. Are there other components that consumers need to be equally as concerned about when purchasing an electric vehicle? And it's kind of a two-part question. What tests can you run? You know, BCA used to run a program when buying a used car. They used to have a mobile service that would go around and give you your 100-point test and things like that. Is there something like that then for electric vehicles? Like how thoroughly can you test or give assurances to that consumer who's purchasing that 8-year-old or 10-year-old electric vehicle?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question. In a lot of cases, it's not very easy to do that. The battery state of health, that's different than the state of charge, because the state of charge is you charge it up, you drive it till it's low, you charge it back up. That number changes all the time. That's normal. The state of health is like, how good is the capacity of this battery? When it was new, if it would drive 200 kilometers, can it still do 200 kilometers today? That's what you really want to know about buying a used EV. The advertised when new was this many kilometers, can it still do it? That depletes over time, some worse than others. That's much harder to test for. There is, most OE manufacturers' software will do some kind of test to give you some kind of rating for that, and that's what you need. But a lot of the aftermarket tools, the diagnostic equipment, will not give you that information or won't give it to you reliably. And so taking it to your average repair shop, your average mechanic, is not going to be, they're probably not going to give you what you need. And even if they could, they probably don't know what they're looking for, just through lack of experience. Not that they couldn't. With a little bit of training, they're capable, no doubt about it. If you can fix any gas or diesel car, I think you can fix an electric vehicle with a little bit of training. But they won't know what to look for. So that's the one biggest issue to me, is that you want someone to know how to test the state of health of the battery. As for the rest, anything electronic can and eventually will fail, but almost always they work 100% till the moment they stop. No different than anything else in your house. So you ever come home one day and click on the TV and it doesn't work? It was working perfectly until the moment it didn't. And that's how anything electronic will probably work.
There's no warning signs.
Probably no warning signs.
Oh.
So it usually, what we see, it's usually the charger. And so, maybe people think the charger is the thing on the post out on the parking lot or the thing that you plug in, but that's actually just a fancy extension cord. The charger is built into the vehicle, and that is the most likely component to fail from our experience. We've replaced them in in Fiats, in Nissan Leafs, in Tesla, or the Tesla powered Toyota RAV4. Those are items that we're seeing fail, and other electronic components like that. But it's going to be the kind of sophisticated, unique electronic components. And yeah, they're going to work perfectly until the moment they don't.
So circling back to information access and parts availability and things like that, certainly with the complexity of the car, as you've been indicating, you need to access the proper information. Now, you're familiar with the right to repair movement and the cases agreement that was reached in 2009. At the time it was deemed to work pretty well. If you wanted the information and you had the tools and the training, you could get it right from the OEMs. That was what the agreement did for us. But right now, there's another private members bill that has been introduced actually by the same MP, Brian Massey from Windsor, a new right to repair bill that this time is seeking to amend the Competition Act to make it mandatory for OEMs to supply not only the information, but the parts. And we've heard lots of examples of where certain companies, like you indicated there, that unless you're certified on their program or whatever it takes, they won't even sell you the part. And so that's obviously a problem with the proliferation of the vehicles. They're not going to be able to handle the OEMs at their dealerships, all of the fleet.
Correct.
So I think that they're going to come to the point where, just like they did in 2009, they're going to see that they need the aftermarket to support the customers. So, long way of asking the question: where do you see, the technology in the car and information access going, and how does it relate to new technologies such as telematics, and certainly the automated self-driving cars that we hear are going to be coming, probably not in our lifetimes, but how does that all relate? Do you think we're okay right now? Are we still going to be okay for a while, or do we need a whole new model in the future?
Yeah, I think the original CASIS agreement, just like the voluntary agreement in the U.S., they worked well for a long period of time. And now that there's been some legislation passed in the U.S., it's, as some of us, me and you, definitely expected, it actually caused some problems. We all know that an agreement is easy to modify and a law is very hard to modify, and the law of unexpected consequences is unavoidable. So you put everything you want into a law, and then a year later, 2 years later, you go, oh, we forgot about that, or we missed, or we didn't realize that it was going to do that. And now it's like, now we go back to the government, ask for a new law. That's going to take 10 years to get a new law. So a voluntary agreement was very good, and I support going forward on that method, but I am concerned that we may actually need to put a law into Canada too, because it looks like it gained enough traction in the US that they're going to do it. How do we not follow what they did? It's just unavoidable almost. But the good news is almost all the OEMs have made access to information very good. Tesla held on for a long time, but they've turned the page. So we bought a subscription to Tesla service information and their software about mid-February or last month, and to do a calibration on a windshield camera on a Tesla Model Y. So by buying in US dollars, so in Canadian dollars, I paid about $150 for like 1 day of service information, and I paid about 450 Canadian dollars for 1 month to use the Tesla diagnostic software. We already bought the cables and stuff, so we have the connectors. So I got to fix a lot of Teslas to recover that $600. I certainly didn't do it on the first one. Fortunately, we actually had 2 Teslas in for windshield calibrations, so I'm maybe at break even now. I need to do a lot of them to pay for the cost that Tesla's asking, but that's fine. Nobody ever asked for this for free. We just want it to be fair. And Tesla's price is maybe a little higher than some, but it is what it is. If we were working on enough of them, it would wash out, right? Every other manufacturer's been pretty good, but there's some little quirks. For example, the Toyota RAV4 EV, it was 3 years only, 12, 13, 14. It's got Tesla powertrain in it. There's special diagnostic software on the Toyota website to download and diagnose and program these vehicles. Well, until the legislation passed in the US, it was available on the Toyota website for the aftermarket. Once the legislation passed, they took it off. So we filed a complaint with NASTF, and Toyota has responded and saying, well, here's what's happened, but we're working to get it back. And they said it was because of the legislation. So there's an OE manufacturer, one of the largest in the world, saying that that law has forced us to remove this software from the availability for us to get. Now, fortunately, we're well connected in the automotive repair and the EV community. We found a backdoor way to get it, right? It's not the right thing to do, It was the factory software. We just figured out how to get that software. We bought the subscription to Toyota, and last time we looked, it was there. This time we bought it, it's not. So it's not like we didn't pay for it. We tried to buy it, and then they took it off their website. So there's some funny little quirks out there, and there's differences like between Canadian cars and U.S. cars. That's where we run into information gaps usually with in terms of what we call right to repair. You know, we buy the subscription, we access the information, and you can't find it because the subscription is only telling you American vehicles. And you know, there's challenges with Canada. One of them is language. We have 2 official languages that might create some challenges for maybe they don't want to translate everything. I don't know the reasoning. They might not know the reasoning. Sometimes it's just a disconnect between the Canadian side of the manufacturer and the U.S. side. So information, I don't think is much of a problem. Parts availability will be a problem for a while still, I think. It's going to take them a while to get their heads around that. Of course, there's always the used market for a lot of these pieces, and sometimes they're expensive. So the used market is often where we're going, but we're often having to buy things from places we don't know, pay for shipping, brokerage to get here. I mean, if I buy from a local auto recycler, I know if it doesn't work, I can call them up. But I can't get these things locally because these cars are so unique right now. So there's a little bit of a challenge. It takes longer, we're paying more, and we're buying from unknown quantities. So far, no bad experiences. And I bought some pretty interesting stuff and paid. I mean, I have to pay to have stuff crated up, especially because everyone's scared of it because it's electric, right? You know, so it's like you got to put placards on the stuff and say, you know, warnings that you'd never would for most car parts.
So is that that presents a lot of problems for a sustainable aftermarket, obviously, because you said, well, okay, I have workarounds, and that works for you. But if we don't correct this, do you just see this pool of independent shops shrinking smaller and smaller because those that can and do get the workarounds are able to do it, survive, but a lot of people are just not going to be able to compete in that space?
Yeah, the automotive aftermarket is in a very challenging time right now. It's very busy. It's actually, there's never been a better time for those that are prepared to go in and go hard and invest. But there's an economy of scale, and there's small shops are really, they're going to be forced to specialize so they can spend all their money in one area and be experts on one brand or 2 brands so they can buy the information, the tools, and be really familiar with the technology because it's so sophisticated now. Or you have to be big so that you can afford all the stuff. So there's a medium size. It's like the middle class, right? Where we get shrunk. We're getting beat from both directions. Absolutely. And so it's going to change the industry. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Between the less service intervals and the technology and the expenses that you have to do.
It's also the secret to the growth of EVs. Otherwise, it just hits a certain percentage of the market, and then it plateaus where everyone else, they can't afford one. So a used car decreases in value up to a certain point, and then if it's no longer repairable, or the only option is I have to get it serviced from a new car dealer using only new certified parts, that's just not affordable. So what are your options then? Well, I can't drive, I guess. I have to take the bus. But that really limits and reduces the market substantially. Now, there could be in BC, and I know you've heard this in the news about extended producer responsibility. So in that model, under the BC regulations, recycling is actually the last thing of the 5 R's, they call it. And for the OE manufacturers, they have to propose a plan of, well, how are they going to reuse, repair, remanufacture, and then lastly, recycle, right? So I guess what could the OEs offer in a plan of sustainability that could promote the reuse and repair?
Well, batteries would be one area for sure because they have all the challenges, and they're one of the items, at least on certain models, that are going to need to be replaced, or perhaps they could be repaired. Taking them apart and matching up the modules inside them and all that stuff to get a balanced pack is a extremely labor-intensive operation. So I can't see that happening in repair shops in a profitable way. I can see do-it-yourselfers and enthusiasts doing that. May or may not be safe, but
we'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah. So the automakers need to find a way to get the batteries back, have a second life, whether it is sending them back and having them factory remanufactured or what have you. I don't know what the answer is there. Healthy aftermarket would be great, but the aftermarket, in terms of if they're anything like the hybrid battery aftermarket, they haven't invested enough in quality control to put out a really good product in our experience. We don't have good experience at all with remanufactured hybrid batteries. So in the EV world, I don't think they're going to do a better job unless they're going to put more money into it. And if they put more money into it, then their price is going to be the same as the OEM. So batteries have to be attacked from many different ways, though, because we have the environmental concern about them. We have the, there's a lot of energy in those batteries. Even just storing them can be dangerous if you don't do it right. If we look at the floods that we just had recently, your thoughts of what a safe storage is might not be what do they have to be 10 feet above the ground? Or like, what are we going to, there's a lot of recyclers in Abbotsford. I mean, they must have had some challenges in their own way. I know.
Empire was flooded out. And only recyclers, it's with the towing industry as well.
Sure.
I mean, a lot of these cars were just under 3 or 4 feet of water. A lot of questions came out. You responded to one. There was a query. Nobody seemed to have the answer, and then you said, "Well, I wouldn't touch it unless you knew what you were doing," which is probably a good advice. So touching on battery safety and battery fires, obviously for the first responders and including towing, which they're first on the scene, it's certainly true that their electric vehicles are very safe. We know that. In fact, they on impact and collision, they're prone to less fires than a gas-powered engine. The only difference is that fire can take 24 up to even 48 hours, right? Yeah. And we did have a case with a tower who the vehicle went into, I think it was in the Burrard Inlet, and he had just put it on the hook, and he was just about ready to leave, and then at that point it erupted. Could have been going down the freeway. Yeah. How concerned, though, just as an independent shop owner, are you worried about fires within your facility? Is that a concern?
It is a concern, but I don't worry too much about it because I know the statistics and I know how it works. I know that gasoline is far more dangerous from a fire and from an explosion point of view. The amount of energy in a gallon of gasoline is like significantly more than what's in a EV battery. It's just, and they're more likely to leak, right? So it's just not newsworthy. So that's why we hear about a lot of these EV fires. But it does make you think of things differently. How we park them in the shop when we're working on them, is it like it's just an escape route? Can we push it out the door if it starts to go? I mean, they don't explode. I mean, they don't tend to anyways. They usually, you'd see smoke, you'd see stuff, and it'd be like, well, if I had a smoking EV in my shop, would we try and push it out the door? That would be a question to answer on a case-by-case basis. I'm not going to give anybody advice, but I do think that knowing the warning signs, and then we've seen the fire blankets. They seem like an excellent. I haven't bought one yet, but I've definitely been considering one. When the numbers start to get up, and we're working on more of them, these blankets, they cover the whole car and basically just cut off the oxygen content, and they can't burn. And the interesting thing about the lithium-ion batteries is that when the thermal runaway starts to happen, it's like they produce their own oxygen. They can just burn, and like you said, they can take days to go out, and it takes thousands of gallons of water. You're not going to put it out with an extinguisher. Once it starts, you're best if you could get it out the door and walk away because it's going, right. Fire department shows up. They're bringing a tanker. They need to put a lot of water on it. So there is stuff to know, but I don't think they're very much risk. So we are just careful, and we do think about where we're putting them within our shop, and that's about as far as we take it. If it's, we want them to be the last one. We don't want to park one up front and park 10 cars behind it and trap it inside, just in case. But that's as far as we go. Worry about it.
So in terms of the adoption of EVs in the marketplace by the consumer and how that translates into the cars coming into the shop, we know the governments have set the mandates of, in BC here, all new vehicle sales are supposed to be zero-emission vehicles by 2035. A lot of the main manufacturers have committed, and they're going all in saying that even in 5-10 years, they're going to have nothing but EVs available for sale. So do you see, I guess one is relative to the other, first of all, the consumers have to do the adoption and buy the EVs. And then that's going to translate into the number of EVs coming into the shop. Do you see this as being a very slow, gradual transition over the course of, say, the next 15, 20 years? Or do you see it really growing exponentially and rapidly in a shorter span of time?
I think that depends on what part of the province or the country you're in. In urban areas, it's going to be the exponential growth, I think. But as soon as you get outside Metro Vancouver, I can definitely understand why people are less reluctant or more reluctant to adopt them for a lot of reasons. I mean, the distances they travel, the charging infrastructure, even home power. I mean, you leave Metro Vancouver and power outages, power goes out for a day or two. It happens, right? And, interestingly enough, some of these cars can actually power back into your home. And that technology has been around for a while, but hasn't really been adopted. But some of the early Nissan Leafs, there was people selling kits that you could plug into your Leaf and power up your house during a power outage.
Ford's advertising that their Lightning truck coming out this year can do that.
Sure. So these are areas that are not thought about by the people that worry about power outages, but nonetheless, it's a valid concern. If you come home with an empty tank and you think that your tank's going to be full by morning because you plug it in and the power's out, well, that is a challenge. Doesn't happen in urban areas, though. So I expect in the cities the growth to be very fast. And I tell people all the time, when was the last time you saw a tube CRT type TV on the shelf? It took 10 years between the first flat screen and the point where there was nothing but flat screens, right? So EVs are kind of hitting that point now. They're just going to push everything else out, except in certain markets. I mean, the truck market, the towing market, commercial vehicles, and then there's the rest of the province. I mean, we have to be aware that this is a big country, and although the population centers are dense, then we have nothing for hours and hours. And, someone in 100 Mile isn't going to buy an EV and count on it. It's just not the way they live, right? So it's going to take longer. I'm not saying that nobody will buy them up there. They absolutely will, but it's going to be way different. Mm-hmm. And that is what concerns me a little, is that the government makes a rule that sounds good in Victoria or Ottawa, but, that doesn't work in Port St. John. So it's like...
Well, that said, though, I did hear an interesting stat on the radio. They were talking about EVs, and apparently the country that is leading the world in EV adoption is Norway. Mm-hmm. 91% of all new vehicles sold are already EVs in that country. And you could make a lot of comparisons between Norway and British Columbia in terms of weather and mountains and all
pretty
the rest
cold.
Of that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. A lot of mountains.
Yeah.
So
sure.
much for those objections.
We got to find out what they're doing if we want this to succeed.
Sure. I mean, the infrastructure and charging is one, and I haven't looked a lot at it, but I'm well aware of those numbers and what we're seeing there. But I assume that they're more densely populated than we are, but I actually don't know that. So, but in terms of climate, you're absolutely right. The climate is a non-issue. People get upset about, talk about traffic jams and all this stuff, and it's like, it's really simple. I mean, a gas or any type of internal combustion car is at its least efficient at idle, and an EV is at its most efficient at idle, because when you're not going anywhere, you're using zero power. Now, the heater uses some power, and we got to understand that, but some of these cars, I think they said the Tesla Model S can go like 72 hours or something on just powering the heater. So to 65 degrees Fahrenheit, these are always American numbers, so let's call that, 16, 17 degrees Celsius. You can go 75 hours? I wouldn't be too worried about that. You're not going to freeze to death.
Yeah, I can't think of a situation where I'd be that long in the car anyway.
Yeah.
So.
There's a lot of, there's starting to become a lot of good information, and there's good sources now of information. But there's a lot of misinformation out there. And we've certainly seen that on the EVfriendly Facebook and YouTube channels and stuff. From your experience, I mean, what is the basic level of consumer knowledge when it comes to EVs? I think most drivers have a pretty good working understanding of their gas power. I mean, they could describe it to you. If you said, well, what makes your car go?
Right.
They could describe it to you. Could they do the same with EVs?
Well, the early adopters, I think, can, but I don't know that answer. I think that the buyers are more sophisticated than ever, so I think there's less. There is a lot of misinformation. Don't get me wrong, there's for sure, but a lot of it's getting past. I mean, in the early days, people thought electric vehicles were slow. I mean, nothing completely not the truth, right? I mean, Tesla's the acceleration power in those cars is just mind blowing, right? So they're not slow, right? People have gotten past that now. They're starting to understand, but there will always be a little bit. I don't know.
So what can shops like yours do to help educate the consumer, or what do you do when you have a customer come in and bring in their vehicle?
Yeah, they ask us more and more now, and I don't know if, I mean, people, an EV is not right for everybody, and so when they're really interested, they're doing their own research. And if you talk to anyone in the EV community, most of them will tell you that when they went to buy theirs, they knew more about the car than the salesperson. So that's been the tradition up until the last couple of years, when numbers have switched now and they're starting to actually sell to just the mainstream buyers. And I do know one person who bought a Tesla and then got rid of it because of where they lived. They couldn't charge it, but almost nobody goes back. Once they've gotten in an EV and they just have to adjust their habits a little, nothing is better. They are extremely convenient, and people think charging,
especially now with gas prices pushing up to $2 a liter.
That's a motivator right there.
Yeah. So I mean, you have to change your habits. I mean, when people say, "How long does it take to charge?" I say, "Oh, about 15 seconds." And they're like, "What?" I'm like, "Yeah, I get home, I plug it in. I leave in the morning, I unplug it. It's fully charged. I leave it with a full tank every day."
Mm-hmm.
Going to the gas station is extremely inconvenient, right? But that's me, and I have home charging, and I use that car for a routine. If you are the person that doesn't have a routine, if you do lots of road trips, if there's those kinds of unexpected, if that's your life, and a lot of people believe that that's the truth. They probably could organize themselves a little bit better, but once you adjust to that, it works great. But if you can't adjust to that, then they're not right for you yet. And the last thing I want to see is anybody buying a car that's actually not right for them. It just doesn't make sense. And I don't try and talk people into it or out of it. It's kind of, that question is a good question, but it's like, should I buy a Ford or a Chevy? Well, what are you doing with it? I mean, the conversation to actually give anybody a good answer about many of these topics would require this whole podcast on that one subject, right?
Yes.
There's a lot of questions I have to ask first. You have to. Are you prepared to change? What is your motive? Is it for the earth, or is it for the dollar, or is it just because they look cool? I mean, there's people buy them for different reasons, and that's always been true about cars. So the question can't be simplified quite that way. It's case by case.
Which is why we created EVfriendly.
Sure.
We're not in the business of selling cars. Mm-hmm. We just want to provide the most accurate information and then get the conversation going so that people can make an informed choice. Because I think a lot of it, and as you alluded to, is habit forming, right? We get into our patterns and our routines, and we know, hey, I have to travel 10 or 15 kilometers to work, and I know there's a Shell and a Chevron and Esso along the way, but there's charging stations along the way. I just might have to start altering my daily routine, and really maybe that's just the difference between buying an ICE or buying an EV.
Yeah, and some of the things that are changing also is the charging stations. And so, I mean, one of the complaints a lot of people had about them early is, oh, sure, I'm my tax money charging your car for free, and only the rich can afford the cars, and then they get free fuel through free electricity. And so pay-for-use charging is taken over in the last 6 months to a year. It's predominantly everything is pay-per-use now. And people, many people thought that was a bad thing, but the truth is nothing but the opposite. Pay-per-use charging has been really good because it means the charging stations aren't clogged up all day. They don't get abused. If you drive to the mall, the old habit was just automatically go to the charging station. I might as well get a couple dollars worth of free charge while I'm at the mall, even though I don't need it. And meanwhile, somebody else comes along who really needs it, and the charging station is taken up. So it's actually, in some ways, starting to get easier to find charging stations because they don't get abused anymore. And when your car is fully charged, the rate actually goes up on many of them. They're not all quite the same, but they charge per time, and the time after 1 hour might triple. So it forces you to come back and move your car. So there's some good things happening on that side in the charging world, but for long distance, that's a different thing, and definitely habits have to be changed. But those, I mean, the fast chargers can be actually really fast. You can get lots of cars to 80% in 45 minutes. It's longer than you want to wait. I get that. But people wait in line 45 minutes at Costco for gas. Wouldn't be me, but so the people that say that's really inconvenient, sometimes they're the guys sitting in line at Costco waiting for gas. Again, changing habits and getting used to what's
Right.
what's the new norm. And as you mentioned, EV-friendly, just to touch back on it, giving out the information so people can make informed choices. And that's, I think, the great thing about this, what you're doing here, this podcast, is making sure people know as much as they can, including, they can make a choice for the repair shop, they can make a choice of what brand they buy, and to think about what they do and make the right choice for them, right?
And of course, having a trusted technician that they can bring their vehicle to, which is very important, right?
Yeah,
I
if I do say so.
So, final thoughts to you, Scott. Where are we going to be in 5 to 10 years from now?
Yeah, I can't predict the future. I'm not good at that, but it's going to be vastly different. The repair shop, the independent repair world is going to be a lot different. That's where I come from, so I can speak of that for sure. We've seen people squeezed out for years. The cost of real estate here is so expensive that only the strong are going to survive, or the total niche market shops. So that's going to be different. And so if consumers want to have choice in 10 years, they should definitely be patronizing their independent repair shop, because otherwise the dealers will be all that's left. So I will say that the cars on the market, we've already seen what's happening there. The numbers are growing all the time. It makes really good sense to have an EV for, if you have 2 cars in a household, I would say the second car for sure would be an EV. I don't know why it wouldn't be. If you want to have that peace of mind of knowing without planning I can get in my car and drive to Edmonton, well, then you're going to have to keep an ICE car for a while, I guess. But 10 years from now, the charging infrastructure, the battery technology, all that stuff, we're going to be seeing a lot of EVs on the road. It's going to be totally different.
Scott, thank you very much for the conversation.
Yeah, thank you.
If you've enjoyed today's podcast, please like and subscribe to our YouTube and Facebook channels. And for those of you that are too busy to watch a full episode of this podcast, check us out on Spotify for EV-friendly on the go.